A black FBI agent walks into the same bank that once denied his father a loan because of his skin color. He's there to deposit a check, proof that times have changed. But within an hour he's in handcuffs, accused of fraud, humiliated before everyone. But they'll soon regret it, because they picked the wrong man to frame. Before we dive deeper in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thought. The glass doors of Rivergate Federal Savings reflected Malcolm Ellison's image back at him as he approached, a tall black man in his late 40s. His stride was unhurried, confident without arrogance, the walk of someone who'd spent 20 years navigating federal buildings and knew exactly how much space he occupied in the world. Inside, the bank hummed with mid-morning activity. Tellers processed transactions behind polished counters. Customers waited in cushioned chairs, scrolling through phones. The air conditioning kept everything cool, comfortable, controlled. The marble floor gleamed under fluorescent lights, and the familiar sounds of receipt printers and gentle conversation filled the air. Malcolm took his place in line, patient and observant. An elderly woman helped her husband count quarters at one of the writing stations. A young mother gently rocked her stroller back and forth, trying to soothe a fussy baby. Everything appeared normal, routine, unremarkable. When his turn came, Malcolm approached Angela Ruiz's window with a polite nod. The young teller returned the greeting, though he noticed a flicker of uncertainty cross her face as he placed the envelope on the counter. "Good morning," Malcolm said, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I'd like to make a deposit, please." Angela opened the envelope, her eyes widening slightly at the check amount, $370,000. She maintained her professional demeanor, but Malcolm caught the hesitation, the way her fingers paused on the keyboard as if the numbers themselves required verification. "This is quite a substantial amount," she said carefully, her training evident in the measured tone. "May I see your identification?" Malcolm produced his driver's license without hesitation, sliding it across the counter alongside his account information. He'd expected verification. Large deposits triggered protocols. That was standard banking practice, nothing personal about it. He'd opened this account specifically for this purpose 3 weeks ago, choosing Rivergate Federal deliberately despite, or perhaps because of its history. The same bank that had denied his father a home loan in 1983, the same institution where Thomas Ellison had stood in his army uniform with discharge papers and postal service pay stubs, only to be told his application required additional review that never resulted in approval. Malcolm had kept his father's files, every rejection letter, every request for supplementary documentation, every polite bureaucratic phrase that meant no, without saying it directly. Those files now sat in his briefcase, destined for the archives of the Ellison Center for Tech and Justice, a non-profit he was establishing with this settlement money, $370,000. Federal payment for his role as lead investigator in exposing a contracting fraud scheme that had stolen disability benefits from wounded veterans. 8 years of stolen money, recovered. Blood money, really. Money meant for wheelchair ramps and modified vehicles, siphoned off by criminals who saw vulnerability as opportunity. Malcolm had spent 18 months building that case, tracking false invoices through shell companies, documenting kickbacks hidden in consulting fees. The conviction had sent 4 people to federal prison. The settlement had taken another year to finalize, and now he was turning that restitution into something his father would have been proud of, a center offering legal advocacy, technology training, and financial literacy education. He'd chosen Rivergate Federal for the deposit because redemption required confrontation, because history deserved witnesses, because the bank that had told Thomas Ellison he wasn't good enough would now process money honoring his memory. What Malcolm hadn't expected was the sharp click of heels approaching from behind the teller line, moving with purpose rather than routine supervision. Priscilla Knotts emerged from her office like a general inspecting troops. Her tailored charcoal suit was expensively cut, her jewelry subtle but unmistakably real, her posture radiating the kind of authority that came from years of wielding power in small kingdoms. She was perhaps 50, with blonde hair styled in a helmet of precision, makeup applied with the care of someone who understood that appearance was armor. The branch manager's expression remained neutral as she approached, but Malcolm caught the calculation in her eyes as she scanned him, his casual Tuesday clothes, his relaxed demeanor, his comfortable presence in a space where she clearly believed he required closer examination. "Good morning." Priscilla's smile was professional and cold, like a handshake from someone wearing gloves. "I'm the branch manager. Angela mentioned you're depositing a rather unusual amount today." "Not unusual," Malcolm replied evenly, his tone matching hers for professional courtesy. "It's a settlement check from a federal whistleblower fund. The documentation is attached to the check itself." Priscilla lifted the paperwork with two perfectly manicured fingers, studying it with exaggerated care. Her eyes moved over the Treasury Department's seal, the official signatures, the verification codes that marked the check as legitimate federal paper. "A settlement," she said the word like it was foreign, suspicious. "And you're certain about the authenticity of this instrument?" The way she said instrument instead of check felt deliberate, clinical, designed to create distance and doubt. Malcolm felt the familiar prickle of awareness that came when someone was playing a game he hadn't agreed to participate in. This wasn't his first encounter with Rivergate's particular brand of scrutiny. He'd experienced it twice before, once when opening the account 3 weeks ago, subjected to enhanced identity verification that white customers in line behind him never faced. Once more when making a test deposit of $5,000, questioned extensively about the source of funds in a way that felt less like security protocol and more like interrogation. Both times he documented everything. Names, times, specific questions asked, evidence of a pattern. "I'm certain," he said. "The check cleared through the Treasury Department 3 days ago. Your verification system will confirm that in less than a minute." "I'm sure it will." Priscilla's fingers tapped against the counter in a rhythm that suggested she was already thinking 3 moves ahead. "However, we've recently received alerts about fraudulent federal instruments circulating in this region. I'll need to consult with our security team before we can proceed." Malcolm watched her retreat toward her office, noting how other customers had begun to notice the extended interaction. The elderly woman behind him shifted her purse higher on her shoulder, her expression concerned. The young father, bouncing the fussy toddler, glanced over with mild curiosity that was shading toward unease. The minutes stretched. 5 became 10. Angela remained at her terminal, her discomfort visible in the way she refreshed her screen repeatedly, finding busy work to avoid meeting Malcolm's eyes. She knew something was wrong with this situation, but she was too junior, too uncertain to challenge her manager's authority. Through the glass partition separating the lobby from the administrative offices, Malcolm could see Priscilla on the phone. Her gestures were animated, her expression shifting from concern to something harder, more determined. Then for just a second, her eyes flicked toward the lobby security cameras positioned above Malcolm's head. She nodded once like she'd just received confirmation of something she'd been expecting all along. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Even from a distance, Malcolm caught the glow of the screen, saw her glance down at a message. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then she clicked the phone dark and stood with the decisive movement of someone who just received orders. When she emerged 15 minutes later, 2 police officers followed close behind, too fast, too ready for this to be coincidence. They didn't come in confused or cautious, asking questions about a possible problem. They came in rehearsed, coordinated, moving with the practiced choreography of men executing a plan they'd already discussed. The lobby's ambient noise seemed to dim as Officer James Dwyer and Officer Rick Harlan entered. Dwyer was the larger of the two, over 6 feet, with the thick build of someone who used his physical presence as a first line of intimidation. His uniform was crisp, his badge polished to a mirror shine, his gun positioned prominently on his hip where everyone could see it. He strutted more than walked, chest puffed out, chin raised at an angle that suggested he'd never met a situation he couldn't dominate through sheer authority. Harlan was leaner, maybe 5'10", with the wiry build of a long-distance runner and the cold eyes of someone who enjoyed the power his badge provided. His hand rested on his belt near his weapon, not quite touching it, but close enough to send a message. He chewed gum with his mouth slightly open, the motion aggressive and dismissive. Other customers stepped back instinctively, creating an invisible barrier around Malcolm. The young mother pulled her stroller closer. The elderly woman whispered to her husband, shaking her head. Phones began emerging from pockets and purses, held low at first, then rising as people realized they were witnessing something that needed documentation. Dwyer positioned himself near the entrance, blocking the most direct exit, while Harlan approached the counter. His boots made deliberate sounds against the marble floor, each step announcing his authority with the subtlety of a drumbeat before an execution. "Sir, step away from the counter," Harlan announced, his voice pitched to carry across the lobby, ensuring everyone could hear this moment of official action. He said it with the smug satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting for this moment, who'd been told exactly what he'd find here. Malcolm remained still, his hands visible on the counter, his posture non-threatening but unbowed. "I'm making a deposit. There's no issue here that requires police intervention." "We've received a report of suspicious financial activity," Dwyer interjected, moving closer with the confidence of someone who expected compliance without question. He hooked his thumbs in his belt, elbows out, taking up maximum space. "We need to verify your identity and the source of these funds immediately." The word immediately came out like a threat, not a request. "I've provided identification to the teller," Malcolm said, his voice level but firm. "The check is legitimate, issued by the United States Treasury Department. You can contact them directly for verification if there's any question." Harlan's gum chewing intensified, his jaw working with exaggerated motion. "Step back from the counter, now." His hand moved closer to his weapon, a gesture that was pure theater, pure intimidation designed for the watching crowd. Malcolm complied, taking one step back, moving his hands away from the counter to his sides where they were clearly visible. Years of training guided his movements, never give them a reason, never provide justification for escalation. "I'm a federal agent with the FBI, he said calmly, maintaining eye contact with Harlan. "My credentials are in my wallet in my inside jacket pocket. If you'd allow me to retrieve them slowly, I can show you." "Nobody's reaching for anything," Dwyer cut him off sharply, his voice rising with artificial alarm, as if Malcolm had threatened rather than offered to cooperate. He stepped forward aggressively, closing the distance in a way designed to intimidate. "Turn around, hands behind your back, do it now." Harlan grinned, actually grinned, like this was exactly what he'd been hoping would happen. "Yeah, turn around, agent." He said the title like it was a punchline to a joke only he understood. "Officer, I'm complying with your instructions," Malcolm said, his voice carrying clearly across the lobby for all the recording phones. "But I need you to understand that I'm a supervisory special agent with the FBI's Office of Internal Affairs. The check I'm depositing is legitimate federal payment. This situation doesn't require," I said, "turn around." Harlan moved with sudden aggression, his hand grabbing Malcolm's shoulder and spinning him roughly toward the counter. His grip was deliberately painful, fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. Dwyer smirked, rolling his shoulders like a boxer preparing for a fight. "Looks like resistance to me, Harlan." "You see resistance?" "Oh, I definitely see resistance," Harlan agreed, his voice loud enough for the gathering crowd. "Non-compliance with lawful orders." Malcolm turned as instructed, but the movement wasn't fast enough to satisfy Harlan's manufactured urgency. Before Malcolm could fully comply, before his hands could move to the position they demanded, Dwyer was behind him, wrenching Malcolm's arms backward with unnecessary force. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into Malcolm's wrists, clicked tight, too tight, deliberately so, sending sharp pains through his hands. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent lobby, punctuated only by gasps from watching customers and the click of camera phones capturing every moment. "These cuffs are too tight," Malcolm said clearly, his voice steady despite the pain radiating through his wrists. "I'm not resisting, there's no cause for excessive force." "Shut up," Harlan growled, his breath hot against Malcolm's ear, as he leaned in close, his gum-chewing mouth right beside Malcolm's face. "You'll talk when we tell you to talk. You understand me, agent?" Dwyer cranked the cuffs another notch tighter, purely for show, purely to assert dominance. "That's right, not so special now, are you?" An older man near the front doors, Malcolm recognized him as Mr. Hammond from the neighborhood, a Korean War veteran who still wore his VFW cap with pride, called out in a voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "That man just told you he's a federal agent. What in God's name are you doing to him?" "Sir, step back or you'll be charged with interfering with a police investigation," Dwyer warned, turning his attention briefly to Mr. Hammond with a look that promised consequences. He puffed his chest out even further, one hand moving to rest on his weapon in a gesture of pure intimidation. Malcolm felt the pressure of the cuffs intensifying as Dwyer cranked them another notch tighter, a petty cruelty that served no purpose beyond asserting dominance. His hands were already tingling, circulation being cut off. "Badge numbers," Malcolm said quietly but clearly, ensuring the phones could capture his words. "Officer Dwyer, badge number visible as 6722. Officer Harlan, badge 7894. Time is 10:17 a.m. I'm recording your names, your badge numbers, and noting that I've been handcuffed despite offering no resistance, and despite identifying myself as a federal law enforcement officer." Harlan's grin disappeared. He grabbed Malcolm's arm hard enough to bruise. "You're not recording anything," he sneered, his face close enough that Malcolm could smell coffee and cigarettes on his breath. "You're under arrest for attempted fraud, suspicion of identity theft," and he paused, his smile returning with vicious satisfaction, "resisting lawful police orders." "I haven't resisted anything," Malcolm said, his voice still level despite the anger building beneath his careful control. "Every person in this lobby with a phone can verify that." Dwyer laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "We'll see what the judge believes," he said, grabbing Malcolm's other arm with unnecessary roughness. "Funny how recordings can be incomplete, how they don't always show the full story, how sometimes the audio gets corrupted, or the footage gets lost." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Happens all the time." As they marched him toward the exit, Harlan deliberately positioned himself where he could shove Malcolm's head down as if the ceiling height required it. Malcolm saw it coming, cataloged it as another violation, another piece of evidence. "Watch your head," Harlan said with mock concern, his hand pressing hard against Malcolm's skull, forcing him into a position of submission that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with humiliation. The pressure was intense, deliberate, designed to make Malcolm stumble. They paraded him through the lobby like a trophy, their grip on his arms tight enough to leave bruises, their pace just quick enough that Malcolm had to move faster than dignity would prefer. Dwyer walked on one side, his chest still puffed out, nodding at customers like he was accepting their approval. Harlan stayed on the other side, his hand remaining on Malcolm's head longer than necessary, pushing down with casual cruelty. Every customer turned to watch. Every phone tracked their progress. The young mother covered her child's eyes. The elderly woman stood with her hand over her mouth, her face showing the kind of recognition that came from having seen this scene before, in other times, with other victims. As they passed through the glass doors into the morning sun, Malcolm caught his reflection one final time. A tall black man in handcuffs, surrounded by white officers radiating satisfaction, being removed from a bank his father couldn't access 40 years earlier. The same bank where Thomas Ellison had stood in his uniform, his discharge papers in hand, believing that his service and his documentation mattered. The irony cut deep. But what cut deeper was the realization that this wasn't an accident, wasn't a misunderstanding, wasn't an overzealous response to a potential fraud situation. This was deliberate, calculated, planned. Someone had made a phone call before those officers arrived. Someone had given them instructions. Someone had decided that Malcolm Ellison, federal agent, corruption investigator, son of a man this bank had denied 40 years ago, needed to be stopped, humiliated, removed before his check could be processed. The question was why, and the answer, Malcolm suspected, was waiting in evidence. He'd been too focused on symbolic redemption to notice immediately, but he would notice. He would document, he would investigate, because that $370,000 check wasn't just money. It was justice reclaimed from criminals who'd stolen from veterans. And if someone at Rivergate Federal was threatened by that particular source of funds, if someone had moved this quickly to stop the deposit, then perhaps the fraud he'd investigated wasn't as contained as the convictions suggested. Perhaps the trail led here. To this bank. To these people. The patrol car door slammed shut with a heavy thunk that seemed to emphasize the finality of his situation. Malcolm sat straight despite the uncomfortable cuffs, despite the pain in his wrists, despite the humiliation burning in his chest. Through the car window, he could see the bank's facade gleaming in the morning sun. Inside that building, his check sat on a counter, unprocessed. The money meant to honor his father's memory had instead triggered a trap, but traps only worked if you didn't see them coming. And now Malcolm saw everything. The Rivergate Police Department's booking area smelled of industrial cleaner and old coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unflattering brightness. Malcolm sat on a metal bench, his wrists still aching from the two tight handcuffs that had only been removed moments ago. Officer Reynolds, a desk sergeant whose tired eyes suggested he'd processed too many arrests to care about individual cases, guided Malcolm through fingerprinting with mechanical efficiency. Right thumb roll left to right, Reynolds intoned without inflection. Again. The ink stained Marcus's fingers black. Each press against the paper felt like a small violation, another layer of dignity stripped away. Through the glass partition separating the booking area from the bullpen, Malcolm could hear Dwyer and Harlan crafting their narrative. Subject displayed aggressive body language upon approach. Dwyer read aloud as he typed, his voice casual, almost bored. Refused to comply with verbal commands. Add furtive movements, Harlan suggested, grinning at his partner. That always plays well. Nice. What about combative attitude when asked for identification? Perfect. Don't forget non-compliant tone. That's classic. The laughter spread, not loud, but enough. Malcolm stood silent, ink staining his fingertips, dignity stripped one fingerprint at a time. The booking officer raised the camera. Smile for the record, he said flatly. The flash went off before Malcolm could react. Perfect, the officer muttered with mock cheer. The Bureau loves clean headshots, makes for good press when it's one of their own. Laughter rippled through the room, low, knowing, cruel in its politeness, the kind that didn't shout, just lingered long enough to sting. Malcolm said nothing, but in that silence, something inside him hardened, the way iron does when struck and cooled. Malcolm catalogued every word, every fabrication. He'd read thousands of reports like this during his career, recognized the template they were following. The language designed to justify excessive force, to transform victims into threats, to provide legal cover for violations of civil rights. A younger officer, Martinez according to his nameplate, shifted uncomfortably at his desk nearby. He looked up from his paperwork, uncertainty flickering across his face. Hey Harlan, Martinez ventured cautiously, shouldn't we at least verify his verify what? Harlan cut him off with a laugh. Get this, the guy actually claimed he works for the FBI. These scammers get more creative every time. Martinez frowned, but dropped his eyes back to his desk, unwilling to challenge his senior officer further. Malcolm noted the hesitation, filed it away as potential evidence of a department culture that discouraged questioning authority. I need to make my phone call, Malcolm stated clearly, his voice carrying through the glass. That's my right under the law. When we're done processing you, Harlan barely glanced up. It's my constitutional right. I should have been allowed to call immediately upon arrest. Harlan laughed, finally turning to face Marcus. You got a lot of nerve talking about rights after trying to pass bad checks. The property clerk, a thin woman named Diane, began cataloging Marcus's belongings with methodical precision. One wallet containing identification, one envelope containing check for. She paused, squinting at the amount. $370,000. Her eyebrows rose as she opened the envelope more fully. Something slipped out, a small paper strip that fluttered to the floor like a falling leaf. The slip showed routing numbers he recognized, the same pattern that had surfaced in his bureau's fraud reports months earlier. That's when it hit him. The check hadn't just triggered suspicion by accident, he'd walked straight into their system, and they'd panicked. Marcus's breath caught. He recognized the format instantly. A bank ledger slip, the kind used internally to track large transactions between accounts. But these numbers, the sequence and formatting, matched patterns he'd been investigating for months, as part of a task force targeting veteran charity fraud. The slip showed routing information between Rivergate Federal and something called Veterans First Fund, a supposed non-profit that had appeared repeatedly in his investigation. Same font, same prefix code, same suspicious transfer patterns that suggested money laundering through shell organizations. His mind raced, connecting dots with the speed of someone trained to see patterns others missed. Could Rivergate Federal be more than just a bank with discriminatory practices? Could it be actively facilitating the fraud ring he'd been tracking? He forced his expression to remain neutral even as the implications crashed over him like a wave. This wasn't just about racial profiling. This was about corruption, systematic theft from programs meant to help veterans, money flowing through seemingly legitimate channels into private pockets. The booking room door swung open with sudden force. Assistant District Attorney Trent Marbury strode in, his expensive suit at odds with the institutional surroundings. Everything about him projected calculated confidence, from his perfectly knotted tie to his practiced smile. Marcus's jaw tightened. He knew Marbury by reputation and recent history. The man who'd buried evidence in the Thompson police brutality case last year, claiming insufficient cause for prosecution despite clear video footage. The prosecutor who specialized in making inconvenient cases disappear. "Where's our high-profile check fraud suspect?" Marbury announced, scanning the room with theatrical interest. His eyes landed on Malcolm and his smile widened. "Ah, there you are." He approached the booking desk, making a show of examining the property forms. "Quite an ambitious amount you tried to pass today. 370,000? That's bold. But don't worry, we take financial crimes very seriously in this jurisdiction." Malcolm met his gaze steadily, noting how Marbury's confidence seemed to falter slightly when faced with direct eye contact that didn't waver or look away. "We'll make sure this doesn't just disappear," Marbury continued, his voice carrying for the benefit of watching officers. "Can't have people thinking they can walk into our banks and biggest mistake of your career." Malcolm interrupted quietly, his voice cutting through Marbury's speech with surgical precision. Every eye in the room locked onto his face. The typing stopped. Even the ambient sounds of the station seemed to pause. Marbury's laugh echoed off the concrete walls, but Malcolm caught something else beneath the sound. A flicker of uncertainty, perhaps concern. The prosecutor turned away quickly, gesturing for an officer to open the holding cell. "Put him in 3, Marbury ordered. "And make sure someone's watching, wouldn't want him to hurt himself." The metal door scraped across the floor with a grinding shriek that set Marcus's teeth on edge. As he stepped into the cell, he watched Marbury's retreating back, noting the tension in the man's shoulders, the way he'd left more quickly than someone truly confident would have. Malcolm sat on the hard bench, his mind already mapping connections. The ledger slip wasn't random. It had been in the envelope with his check, placed there deliberately or left there carelessly. Either way, it linked Rivergate Federal directly to the fraud he'd been investigating. And Marbury's appearance wasn't coincidental. The man had rushed here too quickly, shown too much interest in what should have been a routine arrest, which meant Marbury knew about the fraud, was probably protecting it, might even be profiting from it. The cell door slammed shut with finality. In the adjacent cell, someone hummed an old blues tune, the melody drifting through the concrete space like a ghost. Malcolm closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing, on maintaining the patience that his mother had mentioned that morning. The truth would come out. It always did, but first he needed to survive the machinery designed to grind up people like him, to transform victims into perpetrators, to protect power at the expense of justice. Hours passed, the fluorescent lights never dimmed. Malcolm counted tiles on the ceiling, tracked the shift changes, memorized every face that passed his cell. Evidence, always evidence. Around 7 in the evening, footsteps approached, not the casual stride of patrol officers, but the determined click of expensive shoes on cheap linoleum. Marbury returned, alone this time, his earlier bravado replaced by something harder. "You should have taken the easy way out," he said quietly, standing just beyond the bars. "Admit you made a mistake with the check, accept a plea to a lesser charge, move on with your life." Malcolm stood slowly, moving to face the prosecutor directly. "The check is legitimate. You know it's legitimate. What you're really worried about is what else I know." "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Veterans First Fund," Malcolm said simply, watching Marbury's face. 37 wire transfers in the last 18 months. Rivergate Federal processed every single one. Money in, money out, never spent on actual veteran services. Marbury's expression hardened. "That's quite an imagination you have." "It's quite a paper trail you have," Malcolm corrected. "And now I'm wondering how deeply the district attorney's office is involved. Are you just protecting the fraud, or are you profiting from it? Be careful, Agent Ellison. Or whoever you really are. False accusations can extend your sentence considerably. So can prosecutorial misconduct." Malcolm replied evenly. Especially when there's a federal investigation already underway. He was bluffing about the investigation being advanced, but the flash of genuine fear across Marbury's face confirmed what Malcolm needed to know. The prosecutor was deeply involved, possibly running the whole operation. Marbury leaned closer to the bars, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You think you're smart. You think your badge protects you. I've destroyed better men than you. By the time I'm done, nobody will believe a word you say. Then why are you here? Malcolm asked. If you're so confident, why take the risk of threatening me directly? Marbury straightened, his mask of confidence slipping back into place. Consider it professional courtesy. A warning before things get truly unfortunate for you. He walked away, his footsteps fading into the general noise of the station. Malcolm returned to his bench, his mind working through scenarios, calculating risks, planning moves 3 steps ahead. They'd made their first mistake by arresting him. Their second was letting Marbury show his hand. Each error gave Malcolm more leverage, more evidence, more ammunition for the battle ahead. In the next cell, the blues humming continued. Malcolm found himself listening to the melody, recognizing it after a moment. Ain't nobody's business if I do. An old Billie Holiday song about defiance and dignity. Appropriate, he thought, allowing himself a small smile in the darkness. The humming from the next cell faded into silence. Malcolm closed his eyes and waited for the sound of footsteps, for the door, for anything. Hours bled together until morning crept through the narrow window. Malcolm wasn't free, not really. Hours later, after a long interrogation and a phone call to his attorney, Malcolm finally walked out of the precinct, wrists sore but head high. The city air hit him like cold truth, heavy but freeing. They called it a release pending review, but it felt more like a leash. He'd signed 3 forms, surrendered his service weapon, and been warned not to contact anyone in the bureau. Stay quiet, Marbury had said. Let the process work. The process, he'd seen what that meant for people like his father. So instead he went home, to the only battlefield he trusted, his mother's kitchen. Geneva Ellison's kitchen had hosted countless family gatherings over 4 decades, but tonight it served as a war room. The round oak table that had seen birthday celebrations and Sunday dinners now held laptops, legal pads, and scattered documents illuminated by the pendant light hanging overhead. Malcolm sat with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking, his mother moving between the stove and table with practiced ease. The smell of her vegetable soup filled the small space, a comfort that felt both familiar and impossibly distant given the circumstances. The screen door creaked as Avery Cho, Marcus's longtime partner in the bureau, stepped inside, her arms laden with technology and files. Dark circles under her eyes told the story. She hadn't slept since receiving Marcus's call 12 hours earlier. I pulled everything, Avery announced, spreading folders across the table. Transaction records, routing numbers, corporate registrations, the whole digital footprint of that settlement check and the bank that processed it. Pastor Elijah Monroe arrived moments later, his tall frame filling the doorway. Unlike his usual Sunday presence, tonight he wore jeans and a plain shirt, his silver hair catching the kitchen light. His congregation at First Baptist had been fighting Rivergate's discriminatory practices for years, documenting case after case of denied loans and enhanced verification requirements applied selectively. Tell me what you need, Elijah said, settling into a chair. The community is ready to act. We've just been waiting for the right moment. Geneva set bowls of soup in front of them, her movements deliberate, unhurried despite the urgency humming beneath the surface. First we eat, can't fight injustice on empty stomachs. They ate quickly but gratefully, the warm food grounding them in physical reality before diving into the abstract complexity of financial fraud and systemic corruption. Avery opened her laptop, pulling up transaction records. The check is completely legitimate. Issued by the Treasury Department, cleared through 3 separate federal verification systems. Those officers had no legitimate reason to flag it. Because it wasn't about the check, Malcolm said quietly, it was about control, about showing me my place. Your father's place, Geneva corrected, her voice sharp with memory. They did the same thing to him in '83, different excuse, same message. Pastor Elijah leaned forward, his reading glasses perched on his nose. I've already contacted civil rights reporters. This needs documentation beyond social media. We need established journalists asking hard questions. We need more than that, Malcolm said, standing to pace the small kitchen. We need to connect my arrest to the larger pattern. The fraud investigation, Marbury's involvement, Rivergate's role as a hub for money laundering. Avery's fingers flew across her keyboard. I've been tracking the Veterans First Fund transfers, every third Friday for 18 months like clockwork. Amounts just under $10,000 each time, deliberately staying below federal reporting thresholds. Structuring, Malcolm identified immediately. Classic money laundering technique. Exactly. And look where the money goes. Avery turned her screen so everyone could see. 6 different nonprofits, all registered within the last 3 years, all claiming to support veteran programs. But their tax filings show zero actual expenditure on services. Malcolm studied the names: Veterans United Progress, Heroes Home Foundation, Service Members First Alliance. Each one designed to sound legitimate, to evoke patriotism and sacrifice. Shell companies, Pastor Elijah said, his voice heavy with disgust. Using veterans as cover while stealing from programs meant to help them. Who signs the paperwork? Geneva asked, moving to stand behind Marcus, reading over his shoulder. Avery highlighted a name that appeared repeatedly across multiple registrations. Priscilla Knotts, the bank manager who called the police on Marcus. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. She's not just enabling the fraud, Malcolm said slowly, his investigative mind piecing together the puzzle. She's actively facilitating it. Which means she's either being paid well, or she's being coerced. Avery finished pulling up additional records. Her husband, Michael Knotts, is a disabled veteran. He receives medical support through a private foundation that covers treatments not approved by VA. Late one night, that same foundation's representative had called her. Marbury himself, his voice smooth and venomous. Keep those transfers clean, he'd said, or his coverage ends. You know how quickly donors lose interest in hopeless cases. He needs that medication, she'd whispered. You promised. I promised nothing. Marbury cut her off. Just results. We all serve someone. Mrs. Knotts, you serve me. After the call ended, Priscilla had sat alone in her office, staring at her husband's old Navy portrait. The respirator beside his bed hissed softly, the sound of leverage she could never escape. Let me guess, Pastor Elijah said grimly. That foundation has connections to Marbury. Avery nodded. It's funded by something called Marwin Holdings, limited liability company, private ownership. But public records show Marbury's signature on the registration documents. Malcolm stopped pacing, his hands gripping the back of a chair. So Priscilla processes fraudulent transactions to keep her husband's medical care funded. Marbury controls the money flow. And Rivergate Federal provides the infrastructure to make it all look legitimate. What about the police? Geneva asked. Dwyer and Harlan, they responded too quickly, acted too aggressively. That wasn't random. No, Malcolm agreed. Marbury called them before Priscilla even picked up the phone. He was already monitoring the situation, already ready to neutralize me the moment I showed up. Because he knew about your investigation, Avery said. The task force looking into veteran charity fraud. You've been closing in for months. Malcolm nodded slowly. My arrest wasn't about a suspicious check. It was about stopping an investigation that threatened to expose the whole network. Pastor Elijah removed his glasses, cleaning them with deliberate care. Then we don't just clear your name. We expose the entire system. The community meeting, Geneva suggested. Thursday night at the church. We gather everyone who's been affected by Rivergate's practices, everyone who's been denied, delayed, humiliated. We document the pattern publicly. And I file formal complaints with the Department of Justice, Malcolm added. Civil rights violations, prosecutorial misconduct, financial fraud. Force them to open an official investigation. They'll fight back, Avery warned. Marbury won't just surrender. He'll try to discredit you, bury the evidence, maybe worse. I know, Malcolm said, meeting each person's eyes in turn. That's why we need to move fast. Before they can organize a defense, before they can hide the paper trail, the group worked through the evening, each taking assignments. Avery would continue tracking financial records, building an airtight case showing the money flow. Pastor Elijah would organize community testimony, gathering stories of discrimination and documenting Rivergate's pattern of racial profiling. Geneva would contact other churches, building a coalition of witnesses willing to speak publicly. Malcolm would draft the formal complaints to the Department of Justice, laying out the case in the precise legal language required to trigger a serious investigation. His suspension from active duty didn't prevent him from filing as a private citizen, and his law enforcement expertise would give the complaints additional weight. Around midnight, as they were preparing to call it a night, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Back off while you still can." He showed it to the others without comment. Police intimidation, Pastor Elijah identified immediately. Classic suppression tactic. "Forward it to me," Avery said. "I can trace the number, probably find out which officer sent it." "Let them threaten," Geneva said, her voice carrying the strength of someone who'd faced down worse. "Your father used to say, the loudest threats come from the emptiest guns." Malcolm smiled despite the tension. He was usually right about these things. They gathered their materials, each person carrying away assignments and evidence. As they prepared to leave, Pastor Elijah paused at the door. "Marcus, your father spent years fighting this battle. Died without seeing justice. You're finishing what he started." "I know," Malcolm replied quietly. "That's what keeps me focused." After they left, Malcolm and Geneva remained in the kitchen. His mother poured fresh coffee, settling back into her chair with the ease of someone who understood that real battles required patience. "Are you afraid?" she asked simply. Malcolm considered the question honestly. "Afraid of them? No. Afraid of failing? Yes." "Then you're exactly where you need to be," Geneva said. "Fear of failure drives action. Fear of opponents breeds paralysis." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "Your daddy taught you to fight smart, not just hard. You've got his courage and more patience than he ever had. That combination is what they won't see coming." Malcolm squeezed her hand gently. "I learned patience from you, Mama. Daddy taught me to recognize injustice. You taught me to outlast it." They sat together as the kitchen clock ticked toward 1 in the morning, 2 generations united by a fight that had spanned decades. Outside, the neighborhood slept. But inside that small kitchen, plans continued taking shape, evidence continued being gathered, and justice moved incrementally closer to triumph. Avery Cho's home office looked like a command center designed by someone who'd watched too many crime procedurals and decided they were too conservative. 3 monitors formed a glowing semicircle on her desk, each displaying cascading data streams. Printouts covered every flat surface, connected by red string that would have made a conspiracy theorist proud. Empty coffee cups formed their own monument to sleeplessness near the keyboard. Malcolm perched on the edge of a spare chair, careful not to disturb the organized chaos. Morning sunlight filtered through partially closed blinds, casting thin bars of light across the paper-covered floor. "These serial numbers from the ledger slip," Avery muttered, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with the fluid precision of a concert pianist. "They're not random. Look at this pattern." She pulled up a spreadsheet showing rows of transactions, each highlighted in different colors based on date and amount. Every third Friday for the past 18 months, like clockwork. Every single transaction processes through Rivergate Federal around 2 in the afternoon. "Money laundering operations love patterns," Malcolm observed. "Makes it easier to track internally while appearing random to external auditors." "Smart, but not smart enough." Avery clicked through to another screen. "Because I've tracked where these transfers go, and it gets beautiful in its corruption." She scrolled through a list of organizations: Veterans United Progress, Heroes Home Foundation, Service Members First Alliance, Freedom Warriors Support, Patriot Care Initiative, Defenders Assistance Network. 6 nonprofits, Malcolm counted, all veteran-focused, all registered within a 3-year window, all listing the same address. Avery pulled up a street view photograph showing a strip mall office suite with dark windows and a for-lease sign, barely visible behind overgrown shrubs. 0 employees, 0 physical presence, 0 actual programs. Shell companies, Malcolm confirmed. but elegant ones. Who's going to question organizations claiming to help veterans? Exactly, the perfect cover. Avery clicked to tax records. And look at these filings. Each organization reports receiving community development grants from Rivergate Federal, perfectly legal bank to non-profit transfers for community benefit, except the community never sees a dollar. Not a single dollar. The money sits for exactly 30 days, just long enough to appear legitimate, then transfers out to other accounts. Avery's fingers flew across the keyboard, following the money's path, and those accounts all eventually feed into one destination. She pulled up corporate registration documents. Marwin Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware for privacy, but operating address right here in Rivergate. And look who signs as principal officer. Malcolm leaned closer, though he already knew what he'd see. Trent Marbury's signature, bold and confident across the bottom of the page. So the money flows from Rivergate Federal, through fake veteran charities, into Marbury's private company. Malcolm summarized. How much total? Avery ran the calculation. Over the 18-month period I can track, $2,700,000, give or take. Malcolm whistled low. That's enough to buy a lot of protection. Police officers who don't ask questions, bank managers who process suspicious transactions, judges who dismiss inconvenient cases. Speaking of bank managers, Avery pulled up personnel records. Priscilla Knotts has been signing off on these transfers personally. But look at this detail. She highlighted a section showing approved transactions. She uses different middle initials on different documents. P. Ann Knotts on some, P. Marie Knotts on others, P. Elizabeth Knotts on a third batch, trying to obscure the pattern. Malcolm identified. Make it harder to connect all the transactions to one person. Exactly, but the signature analysis is identical. Same pen pressure, same distinctive loop on the K, same everything. Avery pulled up high-resolution scans. A graphologist would testify in about 30 seconds that these are all the same person. Malcolm stood, pacing the small office. So we've got documented proof of money laundering through fake charities. We've got Priscilla Knotts as a key facilitator. We've got Marbury as the ultimate beneficiary. And we've got the how. Avery added, Rivergate Federal has been processing these transfers under their community development program, completely legal on its face. Banks are encouraged to support local nonprofits, gets them tax benefits and positive PR. But the non-profits aren't local and aren't actually helping anyone. Right, which makes the whole scheme bank fraud, wire fraud, probably tax fraud, definitely money laundering. Avery pulled up federal statutes. We're looking at 10 to 20 years per count if prosecuted aggressively. If prosecuted, Malcolm emphasized, Marbury controls the district attorney's office. He's not going to prosecute himself, which is why we need federal intervention. Avery began drafting a formal complaint, Department of Justice, Public Integrity Section. They handle prosecutorial misconduct and public corruption. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Pastor Elijah. Community meeting tonight packed. Standing room only. Media confirmed. He showed it to Avery, who nodded approvingly. Public pressure and legal pressure. Smart combination. Mama's teaching. Malcolm said. She always said injustice hates sunlight and documentation in equal measure. They worked through the morning, building an airtight case file. Every transaction documented with source records. Every shell company connected with corporate filings. Every suspicious pattern highlighted with careful analysis. Around noon, Avery's computer chimed with an alert. Real-time monitoring just flagged something, she said, pulling up her surveillance software. Large cash withdrawals at 3 different Rivergate branches in the last hour. Malcolm moved to look over her shoulder. They're emptying accounts, trying to, but they're doing it sloppy, panicked. Withdrawals over $10,000 trigger automatic reporting. Avery's fingers flew across the keyboard, capturing screenshots. They're creating more evidence while trying to hide it. Classic panic move. They know we're closing in. Avery's phone chimed with a secure message. She opened it, her face breaking into a broad grin. Judge Martinez just approved our warrant request. We can access all Rivergate's internal transaction records for the past 5 years. Electronic access. Full digital dump. Everything their system has recorded. Avery was already drafting the formal request to the bank's IT department. This is going to take time to process, but once we have it, we'll see every dirty transaction they've ever made. A second chime followed. Avery checked it, her grin widening. And that's the warrant for Shell Company financial records. Judge Martinez is thorough. Malcolm raised his coffee mug in a small salute. One nail at a time. One nail at a time. Avery agreed, clinking her mug against his. They continued working as afternoon settled into evening, building their case with methodical care. Each document supported the next, each piece of evidence linking to others in an unbreakable chain of proof. On Avery's desk, between stacks of papers, an old photograph caught Marcus's eye. His father, Thomas Ellison, standing outside Rivergate Federal in his postal worker uniform. Taken the day he'd been denied the loan, preserved as evidence of discrimination that had never led to justice. Not this time, Malcolm thought, touching the photograph gently. This time we have everything we need. As evening shadows lengthened across the office, Avery printed the final copies of their complaint package. 47 pages of documentation, every claim supported by primary sources, every accusation backed by evidence that would stand up in federal court. This goes to DOJ first thing tomorrow, Avery said, organizing the pages into binders. We send copies to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Division, and the Office of Inspector General. Cast the net wide, Malcolm agreed. Make it impossible for Marbury to suppress or redirect. Exactly. Avery closed her laptop with a satisfying click. Now we go public, let the community see what we've found, let the media ask questions Marbury can't dodge. They gathered their materials, preparing for the evening's community meeting. The technical case was built, the evidence was documented. Now came the harder part, mobilizing public pressure, maintaining momentum, forcing action from systems designed to protect their own. Malcolm took a final look around Avery's office, at the web of evidence spread across every surface. It looked like chaos, but it was actually the opposite. It was order imposed on corruption, truth extracted from lies, justice mapped with methodical precision. Outside, the sun was setting. In a few hours, First Baptist Church would fill with people ready to hear the truth, and after that there would be no turning back. The Fellowship Hall of First Baptist Church had hosted everything from pancake breakfast to Wednesday night Bible studies, but tonight it carried the weight of something heavier. The smell of coffee lingered, but no one touched it. Rows of metal chairs faced a makeshift podium where Pastor Elijah Monroe stood, one hand resting on his worn Bible. The crowd packed every inch, retirees in pressed Sunday suits, young mothers still in their scrubs from hospital shifts, teens leaning against the walls with folded arms. The air vibrated with indignation, confusion, and disbelief. Malcolm stood near the back, pressed against the wall beside the door. He could feel their eyes finding him one by one, whispers crawling like smoke through the room. Some nodded to him in quiet support. Others couldn't quite meet his gaze. The video, the one where he looked like a furious man threatening a young teller, had gone viral in less than 12 hours. Edited, twisted, designed to humiliate. On stage, Pastor Elijah spoke into the hum of murmurs. We are gathered here tonight not to gossip, not to despair, but to remember who we are. A man's reputation can be stolen, but his character belongs to God. From the front row, Mr. Hammond gripped his cane and nodded slowly. That man served this country, he said loud enough for a few to hear. Now the country's treating him like a criminal. The murmurs swelled again. A woman shouted, "Why they coming after our own?" Another voice answered bitterly, "Because he stood up to the wrong people." Outside the church, media vans lined the street like vultures, their satellite dishes pointed toward the hall, waiting for the next sound bite. Inside, the mood tightened. Marcus's phone buzzed, an email from the Bureau's Internal Affairs Division, administrative leave, effective immediately. His access to databases had been suspended. His badge still glinted on his belt, but it suddenly felt like a relic. Avery slipped in quietly through the side door, laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She moved through the crowd, eyes meeting Marcus's for only a heartbeat. "They're not just after your name," she whispered when she reached him. "They're scrubbing data, deleting every trace that connects Marbury's fund to Rivergate." Marcus's jaw flexed, "Then we hit back harder." From the podium, Pastor Elijah raised a hand to calm the noise. The world will call a good man guilty. It always has, but the truth doesn't stay buried forever. It resurrects. The congregation murmured, "Amen," some with fire, some with fear. Later that night, Malcolm sat in his car outside the church. Rain traced slow paths down the windshield, blurring the glow of the streetlights. He turned his badge over in his hands, thumb brushing the metal crest. He spoke softly, not to anyone alive. "Dad, you always said a man's name was all he really owned, but what happens when they take even that?" His voice cracked, the badge slipped from his fingers and landed on the passenger seat with a hollow sound. He didn't start the car. He just sat there listening to the rain drum against the roof, the echo of the pastor's words still burning in his chest. The truth doesn't stay buried forever. The next morning broke gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed low over the city and made everything feel smaller. The streets around downtown Rivergate glistened with the residue of last night's rain. In the hum of early traffic, Avery Cho hurried along the cracked pavement toward the subway entrance, her messenger bag slung tightly across her shoulder. She had been awake for 27 straight hours. Her eyes burned, her fingers trembled slightly, but her mind was clear. All night she had chased the digital trail left behind by the doctored video that had destroyed Marcus's name. The data fragments led her deep into the Department of Justice's internal network. What she found made her stomach knot. The video hadn't come from a random leak. It had been uploaded through a secure DOJ portal, accessible only by Marbury's office. Avery stopped for a moment outside the station, the morning rush streaming around her. She pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over Marcus's number. She hesitated. If the DOJ network was compromised, his line might be tapped. She couldn't risk it. She needed to reach him in person. Inside the subway station, fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The air smelled of metal, damp concrete, and the faint tang of ozone. She sat on a bench near the far wall, laptop balanced on her knees, the screen reflecting her pale, determined face. Her fingers danced over the keys as she opened the Bureau's secure drop protocol. Upload source, DOJ internal node 04, Washington Circuit transfer path, encrypted relay FBI secure archive status, initializing. A dull echo of footsteps pulled her attention away. Two men in dark coats moved down the stairs. Their pace was casual, but their eyes, flat and deliberate, found her too quickly. One carried a folded newspaper, the other adjusted his sleeve, and Avery saw the unmistakable glint of a pistol holster beneath. She whispered to herself, "Too soon." The laptop chimed softly, 45% uploaded. The first man approached, smiling without warmth. "Miss Cho, you left a mess on someone's server." Avery's heartbeat drummed in her ears. She closed the laptop halfway, feigning calm. "You should tell your boss to clean it up then." He lunged. She swung the laptop up, catching him across the jaw, and ran. Her shoes slapped the concrete as she bolted toward the lower platform. The second man shouted, the echo bouncing through the tunnel, 68% uploaded. She fumbled in her bag, pressing the small manual override switch clipped to her keychain, a hidden trigger that forced the upload to finish regardless of connection loss. The laptop screen flashed, AU2 backup engaged. Earlier that night, while Malcolm was drafting the final complaint, Avery had paused beside his desk, her expression unusually grave. "I've mirrored everything," she said, tapping the side of her laptop. "Same shadow network we used back in the Jensen case. If anything happens, if I go dark, the system will finish the upload automatically." Malcolm looked up from his notes. "You think it'll come to that?" Avery gave a small, tired smile. "I've stopped underestimating how far corruption will go to protect itself." Then she was gone, her bag slung over her shoulder, her promise hanging in the air like static before a storm. The first man caught her near the vending machines. The blow sent her sprawling, the taste of copper filling her mouth, her vision blurred. But through the haze, she saw the screen of her laptop, still open, the words glowing faintly, "You poloed complete. 2 files archived." Her fingers, slick with blood, brushed the keyboard one last time. Then the light left her eyes. That evening, Malcolm sat alone at his dining table, his phone buzzing beside a half-finished cup of coffee. He hadn't heard from Avery all day. The silence gnawed at him. He opened his laptop out of restless habit. A new notification blinked in the corner of his inbox. Subject: YouTube backup successful. 2 files uploaded. Sender: FBI secure drop system. Malcolm froze. His hands trembled as he clicked. 2 encrypted files appeared, time-stamped only an hour earlier. No message, no signature, just data and silence. For a long moment, he didn't move. The hum of the refrigerator filled the kitchen, the sound sharp in the quiet. Then his eyes blurred. He pressed a hand to his mouth, as if holding something back, a sound, a prayer, maybe both. He could still hear her voice. If anything happens. His chest tightened. The air felt heavier, like the room itself was mourning. God, you didn't have to prove how brave you were, he whispered. The words broke halfway through. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and covered his face with both hands. A single tear hit the wooden surface before he wiped it away with the back of his wrist, quick, almost angry. When he finally looked up, his voice was rough but steady. You got the truth out, Avery. You got it out. He sat there for a long time, the cursor blinking on the screen like a pulse that refused to die. The hum of the refrigerator became the only sound in the house, steady and indifferent. He remembered the way she used to tap her pen against the desk when she thought, a rhythm that filled every long night they spent chasing ghosts in files. Now the rhythm was gone. Malcolm lowered his head, pressing his palms together. You deserved better, he whispered. But I'll finish what you started. Outside, thunder rolled again over Rivergate, low and distant, like the slow drumbeat of justice beginning to stir. He sat there a while longer, the glow of the laptop screen washing over him. Malcolm had spent the rest of the night forwarding Avery's files through encrypted bureau relays, one copy to the DOJ Public Integrity Unit, another to a friendly senator's office. He knew they'd read it fast once the story went public. Outside, thunder rolled again over Rivergate, low and distant, like the slow drumbeat of justice beginning to stir. The night settled over Rivergate like a bruise, dark, silent, and slow to fade. Inside Geneva Ellison's modest brick house, the lights were dim. The rhythmic ticking of the old mantel clock was the only sound. Malcolm sat at the kitchen table, a half-drunk cup of coffee cooling in his hands, the same mug his father used to drink from before dawn patrols decades ago. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish, and the stew his mother had made, but never touched. Geneva stood at the sink, rinsing a dish she'd already washed 3 times. You haven't eaten, she said quietly. Not hungry. You need strength for a fight, son. Even David had to eat before facing Goliath. Malcolm tried to smile but couldn't hold it. His reflection in the kitchen window looked older than he remembered, harder, heavier. A soft knock came at the front door, 3 times, slow, deliberate. Geneva froze. Marcus's instincts sharpened immediately. He rose, setting the mug down without a sound. Stay here, he murmured. When he opened the door, Officer Harlan stood on the porch, dressed in plain clothes but with his badge clipped to his belt. His posture was casual, but his eyes were cold and sure. The orange glow of the streetlight cast long shadows across his face. Evening, Agent Ellison, Harlan said, voice dripping with mock civility. Hope I didn't wake your mother. Malcolm didn't answer. He stepped just enough into the doorway to block the man's view of the living room. You shouldn't be here. Just checking in. Harlan smiled thinly. You're stirring up a lot of noise for a man on administrative leave. He took a slow step closer. You poked your nose into something you shouldn't have. And the people you're poking. He paused, lowering his voice. They don't play fair, Marcus. Men like you, and your mama, you end up getting caught in the crossfire. Marcus's jaw tightened. His voice dropped to a low growl. If I burn Harlan, I'll make sure I take your whole damn system with me. For a moment neither man moved. The hum of a cicada outside filled the silence. Harlan's smirk twitched, his confidence faltering just slightly. Then he turned toward the steps, the wood creaking under his boots. Be smart, Agent. Some fights ain't worth the body count. The door closed with a hard click. Malcolm leaned against it, breathing through his teeth. His pulse thudded in his ears. Geneva's voice came from behind him, soft but firm. Son, don't let anger turn you into what they already think you are. Malcolm turned toward her. The lamp above the table lit the fine lines on her face, the same eyes that had watched his father go to war and come home broken but unbowed. "I'm not angry, Mama," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm awake." He sat back down, picking up his badge from the table, turning it slowly between his fingers. Outside, a car engine started and faded into the night. Geneva came to stand behind him, resting her hand gently on his shoulder. "The Lord doesn't need you to be their judge, Marcus, just their witness." "Then I'll witness the whole truth," he said quietly, "even if it kills me." The old mantel clock ticked on. Somewhere beyond the thin walls of the house, the city slept uneasily, its sins stirring in the dark, knowing the man they'd tried to bury was still standing. The morning of the march broke clear and bright, sunlight spilling across Rivergate Square like a promise kept. By 9 o'clock, the streets were already alive with sound and purpose. Church groups carried handmade signs painted with verses from Micah and Isaiah, their words bold in black paint. "Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly." Retired veterans in pressed uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder with college students holding banners that read "Truth is patriotism" and "Justice for Ellison." The air itself seemed to hum, alive with chants that rose and fell like waves, the echo of hymns carried between the brick buildings that had watched decades of change. From the courthouse steps, Malcolm stood and watched, quiet but unshaken. He wore a plain navy suit, the same one from his father's funeral, his badge pinned discreetly beneath his lapel. He wasn't there as an agent anymore. He was there as a man reclaiming his name, his dignity, and everything that had been taken from him. Pastor Elijah Monroe stood behind a portable podium, his voice carried by a single crackling microphone that somehow felt stronger than any sound system. "This isn't a riot," he said, voice rich and resonant, the cadence of a man born to preach. "This isn't revenge, this is resurrection. The truth that was buried is rising today." A ripple of applause spread through the crowd, then a wave of cheers. News crews turned their cameras toward the podium, and even the sun seemed to shine brighter as if it too wanted to bear witness. Local stations, national outlets, and hundreds of phones streamed live, capturing a movement that had started as a man's humiliation and become a city's redemption. Malcolm felt someone approach beside him. It was Mr. Hammond, leaning on his cane, the brim of his old VFW cap pulled low over his eyes. The lines in his face told a lifetime story, battles fought overseas and at home, victories and disappointments endured with quiet grace. "You remember what I told you, son?" he asked, his voice gravelly but steady. "A man's worth ain't proven in comfort, it's proven in the fire." Malcolm nodded, his gaze steady on the crowd. "Then I guess it's time." He said it softly, not to boast, but as one accepts the inevitable. Down near the outer edge of the crowd, two uniformed officers moved with deliberate calm, Harlan and Dwyer. They pretended to direct traffic, but their radios stayed silent. They weren't there for peacekeeping. They were there for him. Malcolm felt his instincts prickle, that sixth sense honed by years in the bureau. He caught the faint metallic glint of a sealed envelope in Dwyer's gloved hand. He had seen that look before, the kind of look men wore when they were about to do something they knew they couldn't undo. A cameraman from Channel 7 News, unaware of the tension unfolding, swung his lens in their direction to capture some filler footage for the broadcast. What he caught instead was the beginning of the end. Pastor Elijah's voice rose above the noise again, calling for a moment of prayer. The chanting quieted, heads bowed. In that brief hush, the sound of footsteps approached. Harlan drifted closer, his boots crunching against the gravel, his expression unreadable. He leaned close enough for Malcolm to hear his whisper. "You didn't listen, Ellison," he murmured. "Some fights end in the dirt." Malcolm didn't flinch. "Then you better hope you're standing somewhere higher." His tone was low, steady, the kind of voice that came from a man who had already lost everything fear could take. Dwyer moved fast, too fast. He bent toward Marcus's briefcase, trying to slip the envelope inside. But as he did, his elbow caught the corner of the podium. The envelope tumbled to the ground, hitting the pavement with a soft slap before bursting open. Dozens of papers scattered, catching the wind. Red stamped words stared up at everyone who saw them. District Attorney Evidence Control. The square erupted, not with shouts, but with gasps. The cameraman instinctively zoomed in. Pastor Elijah froze mid-prayer. Harlan's face went pale. For a moment, time itself held its breath. Then, from somewhere near the courthouse steps, a voice rang out, firm, commanding, cutting clean through the confusion. Federal jurisdiction. Officers, step away from Agent Ellison, now. From the north side of the square, a line of agents in suits surged forward, badges raised, voices sharp with authority. Officer Harlan, Officer Dwyer, their leader shouted, "You are under arrest for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering." The crowd broke into murmurs that turned to cheers as the two officers were disarmed and handcuffed in full view of the cameras. The hymn that had paused moments earlier began again, soft, unplanned, trembling like the first crack of dawn after a storm. Then, as the agents moved, the courthouse doors opened. Trent Marbury appeared at the top of the steps, his face flushed red with rage and disbelief. "This is absurd," he shouted. "You have no..." He didn't finish. The DOJ's senior counsel stepped into the sunlight, holding a sealed warrant high. "Signed by a federal judge this morning," she said. "Trent Marbury, you are under arrest for conspiracy, falsification of federal evidence, and abuse of public office." The crowd exploded. Applause, shouts, sobs, the roar of relief that only comes when justice arrives after a long drought. Mr. Hammond wiped his eyes. "About time," he whispered. The hymn swelled louder now, Amazing Grace, voices joining from every corner of the square. Down near the courthouse steps, a woman pushed through the crowd. Priscilla Cots, her phone buzzed in her trembling hand. One last message from Marbury. "Say a word and your husband's treatment stops tonight." She stared at the screen, then at the flag hanging from the courthouse balcony, the same flag her husband had once saluted before coming home broken. For a long moment, she didn't move, then she whispered, "No more," and stepped forward, tears streaking her face. "These are the originals," she said, her voice cracking but clear enough for the microphones to catch. "Everything. The transfers, the accounts. I can't stay silent anymore." She handed it to the DOJ agent, then turned toward Marcus. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all of it." Malcolm didn't speak, he only nodded, not out of anger or forgiveness, but acknowledgement. The truth was finally free, and that was enough. Pastor Elijah raised his hands again, voice ringing through the square. "Let this be known," he cried, "that justice delayed is not justice denied." The crowd erupted once more. Choir voices rose over the noise, uncoordinated but perfect, singing Amazing Grace into the blue morning sky. Malcolm stood still, the light catching the courthouse windows until they gleamed like mirrors. For the first time in months he drew a breath that reached all the way to his soul. The truth had finally stepped into the light. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the courthouse dome, Rivergate Square emptied slowly, yet the echo of the hymns lingered in the air like an unfinished promise waiting to be fulfilled. 3 months later, the same courthouse steps gleamed beneath banners of white and gold. The Rivergate Federal Savings Building was gone, reborn as the Ellison Center for Tech and Justice. Its stone walls had been scrubbed clean. The metal bars once covering its windows had been removed. Inside, folding chairs filled the lobby, now transformed into a temporary auditorium. The air smelled faintly of new paint and polished oak, the scent of beginnings. Banners lined the front entrance, reading "Restoring Trust, Restoring Dignity." The same city that had watched Malcolm be led away in handcuffs now gathered to honor him. Geneva Ellison sat in the front row, her silver hair pinned neatly back, her blue dress catching the morning light. Beside her sat Pastor Elijah and Mr. Hammond, his cap once again perfectly pressed, his wife holding a folded American flag in her lap. Malcolm stood at the podium. He wore his navy suit again, but this time his FBI badge gleamed faintly beneath his lapel, not as armor but as proof. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He simply looked at the faces before him, men and women from every corner of Rivergate, each one carrying a piece of the story. "My father used to tell me," he began finally, "that dignity doesn't come from what a man owns, or wears, or earns. It comes from how he stands when the world decides to test him. His voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. The room was silent, every breath caught in the space between words. He looked at his mother. Geneva's chin trembled, but she nodded. 3 months ago, Malcolm said, I stood right outside this building in handcuffs. I was called a liar, a fraud, a threat. But what this city proved, what you proved, is that truth can't be buried by power, not forever. The crowd murmured softly, like wind through the trees. Mr. Hammond leaned forward, his voice carrying just enough to be heard. Preach it, son. Malcolm smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes softening. This center isn't about me, he continued. It's about rebuilding what we lost, trust, between communities and institutions, between justice and the people it serves, between a nation and its own conscience. Applause rolled through the hall. Pastor Elijah wiped his eyes. Geneva pressed her hands together in her lap. For a brief moment, everyone stood, applauding not a man, but what he represented, a truth long denied, but never destroyed. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to mingle, Angela Ruiz, the young teller from that first day, approached Marcus. She held out a printed deposit slip, her hands trembling slightly. Welcome back, Agent Ellison, she said softly, her voice catching. This time, no questions asked. Malcolm took the paper gently, meeting her eyes. Thank you, he said simply, and for her that was enough. Across the aisle Mr. Hammond stood with the help of his cane. Your daddy would have been proud, boy, he said, his voice breaking just a little. Malcolm stepped off the podium, crossed the stage, and took the old man's hand. He fought for a country that didn't always fight for him. Malcolm said quietly, today, maybe we took one step closer. Mr. Hammond smiled through tears. One step at a time, son. That's how wars are won. As the last guests drifted out into the square, Malcolm lingered near the entrance. The sunlight poured across the marble floor, catching the bronze plaque beside the door. The words glowed in the light. The right to dignity is not subject to verification. He traced the letters with his fingertips, feeling their weight. Geneva came to stand beside him, her hand slipping gently into his. Together they stood there in silence, watching people pass beneath the banners that bore their family's name. Outside, the bells of First Baptist rang. Their tones rolled over the rooftops, echoing through Rivergate like a benediction. Malcolm breathed in deeply, the air clean and sharp with promise. He smiled, not the proud kind, but the kind that came from peace hard-earned, from truth finally set free. Justice at last had a face, and it looked like every ordinary man and woman who refused to stop believing that truth still mattered.